TJ very thankfully showing us there that he has more emotions than just hunger, apparently. I had no idea myself, but a lot of fun there with Bloody Face. But it's time to get serious now, Gia. We're jumping into our first match of the day. We got Staz and we've got Surrender. And you've had a little bit of time to look at the lineups. How are these looking up against each other here?
Yeah, I would say from talking to Staz and also just taking a glance at the lineups that it seems like Surrender has a bit of a leg up. The Bomb Warrior he's bringing is a bit of wild card. Surprise Bomb Warrior as an archetype has survived past the rotation of Boomsday at all. But of course, speaking of wild cards, Staz has that Totem Shaman, the only one in the entirety of Grandmasters this week. And in the Swiss rounds, I do believe Staz managed to take that 3-0 versus Surrender. So like there's going to be a repeat of history.
We'll have to see. This is a historic matchup. As you, I can't remember if it was during the rehearsal or you mentioned it live, but this was the first ever match that we had of Grandmasters, was Staz versus Surrender way back at the start of last year, and now it's repeating it again, the first match of year 2 as well. It's strange how these things work out, given this was not predetermined in any way. But it's going to be an exciting match nonetheless. This is fresh off of the new Ashes of Outlands meta, of course. They're going to have to be trying out the 10th new class in Hearthstone in Demon Hunter, as every single player in Asia Pacific has decided to bring. But they're also going with some decks with a little bit of an old school flair, you could say, I suppose, with the Highlander Reno Mage making an appearance for both players.
Yeah, based on Staz's tweet, he did say that the mage underperformed for him while the shaman overperformed. But there's one thing that I'm not too surprised about, which is that both players have decided to ban each other's demon hunters. So despite Ashes of Outland coming in strong for the patch, we are not going to see that for this first match anyway.
Yeah, based on the first day of Swiss, I believe that Warlock was ever so slightly more banned than Demon Hunter overall, but it does feel like that is still the premier ban. You're either going Demon Hunter or Warlock in the majority of cases. Some players splashing into a Druid ban as well, depending on their matchup. But it does feel like that is definitely the way to go, because with Demon Hunter already going through one round of nerfs and now being hinted over the social medias that something else may be on the way for Demon Hunter. It feels like now, if ever, is the time to use it as much as possible.
For sure. And there's actually quite a lot of similarity between the two players' lineups. If we look at archetype, they're both bringing Demon Hunter, that is the tempo version. They're both playing Highlander Mage. They're both playing Spell Druid. The only discrepancy is in those wildcards we mentioned, the Warrior for Surrender and the Shaman for Staz. And yet, despite Staz saying the Shaman performed well, his score is quite far off from Surrender's. He finished 3-4 in Swiss versus Surrender's top of the pack 5-2. So why do you think that is?
I feel like for me, Surrender last year, he wasn't one of the most creative deck builders, it felt like. He, I think, is a little bit more in tune with the European and American metagame, given that he is on T1, which, despite being a South Korean team, is also joined with Ball Control, Fino, and Orange on his team. So maybe he's getting a little bit more of a traditional deck building perspective. But basically, he was just outplaying his opponents, I felt like, game after game. He is just at the absolute top of the Asia Pacific ladder in terms of skill, if you ask me.
Yeah, for sure. We cannot question Surrender skill. If you look at his consistency throughout it feels like the entire time I've been into Hearthstone, Surrender has been winning something or placing top 4 in something. And the other big discrepancy I would say is perhaps how the mages are built. I would say that Staz's is a little bit more anti-aggro, including techs like this new card, Rusty Raider, one of the neutral cards that both of them are playing that, as well as Overconfident Orc. These are the two neutral cards that I figured would be able to make it into decks, if any decks included neutral cards at all, aside from the legendaries. They're very powerful at stalling early aggro.
Yeah, exactly. Ashes of Outlands, it gives with one hand and it takes with the other. It's giving a lot of powerful, aggressive options, obviously, with the Demon Hunter, but it's throwing in those strong neutral taunts that make it a lot easier to actually fight back against some of that aggression. Maybe it was a little bit tilted in the way of Demon Hunter towards the start, but it seems like that may be fixed. And a lot of players are even arguing now that Demon Hunter is, not quite so powerful as all the hype may suggest. But we'll have to see how that shakes out in our matches here today. But as I was saying about Surrender being, in my opinion, his main strength just being his strength at Hearthstone. He's just a very, very strong player. Staz, I feel like, on the other hand, I think is a little bit more of a wild card. He relies on unpredictability and decks that other players may not know so much about in order to get the upper hand on his opponent. But unfortunately, as was maybe to be expected with this being a slightly different broadcast to usual, we're having some slight tech issues. So I believe we're going to go to a quick video before we come back and bring you Game 1 of 2020 Grandmasters.
Wow, all those sound like things like Language Hacker would do.
He is not giving me any banana bread.
He doesn't make banana bread.
Banana bread. That was not the line.
I've known him so long, he never offered me a slice.
I don't think Language Hacker make mean banana bread.
Language Hacker's lie is that he does not make mean banana bread. Otherwise, he would have definitely given me a slice. But at this point, I've known him for a while. Wow, I feel a little hurt, actually.
He used to play the flute as the lie.
Wrong. He doesn't make me banana bread. I've never tried it, but he claims he does. So.
Honestly, maybe that's a lie as well.
Yeah,
We need him to test it out.
If Blizzard hooked me up with a kitchen at the next Master Tour, I could sell banana bread.
I don't think he used to play the flute. Probably some different instrument.
He didn't used to play the flute.
Oof.
Alright. I would go for a third one, but he doesn't know how to play flute. Is the first one?
He did used to play the flute.
Oh, wait.
He's not ambidextrous.
Oh, I thought he knew his right hand.
There's no way Language Hacker is ambidextrous. That's insane. If he was ambidextrous, I'm pretty sure I would have seen it at some point. Like, that's something I would show off. Like, who wouldn't show that off?
Welcome back to Hearthstone Grandmasters. Sorry about that slight technical delay, but we are, I believe, ready to jump right into our game as the players were able to jump into it while we went on the break. And as you can see here, it's the first game of Hearthstone Grandmasters for 2020. Surrender versus Staz, trying to fight it out to get that first place for as many points as possible. Gia, what are we looking at from Staz's side on this first game?
This is the deck that I was very much looking forward to, the Totem, which relies a lot on the synergies between the 0 mana spells, Totemic Might and Totemic Surge, and the totems. You're not actually hoping to buff much of your hero power totems, but more so things like the Evil Totem, Flame Tongue, and Mana Tide take advantage of Splitting Axe to copy them, as well as Totemic Reflection, and just try and get a bunch of value from the card draw you get off of Mana Tide and the lackeys you get off of Evil Totem.
Pretty decent looking start here, I'd say from Staz. He's got the early game aggression that you'd definitely be looking for to start pushing some damage. But I feel like up against a somewhat control-ish deck like this Bomb Warrior, he might need a little bit more mid-game to late-game push if he's going to be able to overcome it. Because I would have to say, an initial glance, I definitely feel like the Bomb Warrior is in the driving seat in this matchup.
Oh, for sure. But I would say you'd have to wait for when the Shaman finally starts to ramp up its value. This is a little bit similar, I would say, to Quest Shaman in that in the early game, it seems playing with 2 cards, and by the end of the game, they've got like 10 cards and infinite value generation going on. So that does very much rely on getting Evil Totem to stick and copy, though. So that's not always the case here. I did get a chance to talk with Staz, and he said that if he had a second ban, it would be this warrior, because he feels more confident playing the shaman into the slower decks like Mage, Priest, and Warlock, which are relatively popular for this tournament, more so than warrior. But definitely it does not perform well against Demon Hunter, so Staz had to ban that.
So it's interesting you bring up Evil Totem because, like you said, obviously you want to be copying that with Splitting Axe and buffing up its attack with Totemic Surge and Might. But do you think you should just throw it down here instead of going with a Storm's Wrath wide buff?
Well, I was thinking about it, and Staz says go for it, and I'm not sure if this is a play that's more of like just get it done so you can be aggro, but maybe thinking about what exactly can the warrior do to deal with this on turn 3. There is the option of coining some removal in the form of Wrench Caliber, though.
Yeah, it does make things a little bit awkward though, right? Because I think he probably wants to lead into Coin Brawl.
Right.
Is where my head would be at the moment, especially if you're expecting any kind of bit of push onto the board on the next turn. So maybe you just bite the bullet and throw down the Bloodsworn Mercenary. It's obviously not getting the Battle Cry value, which is where most of the power lies in the card, but it still just trades pretty well against the board, and, you know, if it doesn't get taken care of, maybe you don't even need to brawl thereafter.
I do also like holding on to the brawl, especially since on turn 4 you might be expecting something like Splitting Axe coming out from the Shaman, and he could try and bait out one of those charges and then rip the brawl.
What now?
So if we are biting the bullet this turn, the question is whether he is going to draw with the second Corsair's Cache, but Surrender decides to just get rid of the totem right now, Wrench Caliber. And bear in mind that this is the second time these two players are playing each other this week. Maybe Surrender learned a thing or two that we did not see on stream when they played each other the first time.
Maybe, but I'm not entirely sure it's going to work out fantastically for Surrender here. Obviously, it looks like he has the ability to take out the Elemental with the second swing of his Wrench Caliber. But, you know, the Org Merchant could definitely take care of that, giving it the Divine Shield for the exchange of 1 health. Or maybe we see Staz just throw down the Violet Teacher because he says, you know what, that's only got 4 attack, it's not taking it out.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like the on-curve play, and with decks that like to play a lot of minions, that is generally what you go for. But then he has to bear in mind that if that gets removed, he is running low on resources for refill. The Storm's Wrath becomes near useless.
Very true.
Nature doesn't stick, he won't be able to get the synergy with the spell.
We are obviously living in a world without Warpath anymore, though. Which definitely changes the equations on how boards can be removed.
Staz instead deciding to go for Order. I am unsure if there's a reason for not buffing the Lackey as well.
I think it's actually because of Bladestorm, right? And now if he has a 1 health minion, Bladestorm will only kill off the Lackey instead of taking out 3 minions there.
Very true.
Bladestorm, the new card that says deal 1 damage to all minions until a minion dies. So I think this is actually pretty deliberate from Staz and also quite clever.
Right, I completely missed that, but it makes total sense now. Bladestorm, a bit different from how you would play around things in the past, and it's very cool that with every expansion, there's a new card that you need to think about, like, do I distribute the health evenly on things? This is kind of like the opposite from Defile in terms of how you want to place your minions around it.
Yeah, it's the kind of AoE that I'm a big fan of, unlike the Psychic Screams of the past, which just still gives me nightmares.
Right. And speaking of new cards, there is the Guard Merchant, featured 2 copies in Staz's hand. Battle Cry, deal 1 damage to a minion and give it Divine Shield. So probably a bit more useful in matchups where you want to be taking trades with the Divine Shield immediately, and also way more synergy when you actually get to copy your totems with things like Splitting Axe and Totemic Reflection. But unfortunately for Staz, those are not available. Now, he does have the mana to play Violet Teacher again, but it's walking right into a Brawl turn from Surrender. So it's a bit scary for Staz, but on the bright side for him, Surrender's health total is dropping pretty quickly.
Yeah, let's take a look at Staz's deck. So this is very different from aggro shamans that were a bit more popular last season. Or the season before, where there's effectively very, very limited burst from hand. You're not running Lava Burst, Doom Hammer, anything like that. It obviously much more relies on actually sticking a board. So you can't really just push everything to the face and say, all right, I hope I draw the lethal off the top. Staz needs to make sure he has some kind of a board presence going into the next few turns, which is why he's, as you kept saying, being a little bit more conservative.
Yeah, he's milking the use out of this hero power. And I have seen matchups back in the day where Shaman somehow manages to outvalue Warriors simply by pressing their hero every turn and threatening things like Bloodlust. Not that that is in the deck, but there are similar effects that can take advantage of whiteboards like Vecina in the deck. And with that threat, you maybe cause the warrior to overreact, and then manage to scrounge together enough value to close out the game.
The brawl does finally come down for Surrender. I'd say it's about on the turn he'd want it. Maybe he would have gone for it a turn earlier with the second one in hand. But the main thing is he's now alive. And there's limited burst, as I said, in the Shaman deck. Splitting Axe, really the scariest thing you're looking at from just out of hand. But it is that awkward point now for Warrior that it feels like all the modern-day Warrior decks slot into, where you've got a lot of pieces of a puzzle, but it doesn't quite fit together. He still needs the risky skippers, in order to really get those combos rolling. With the Armor Smith, gaining a whole bunch of armor, copying something with the Merchant as well. And so maybe he'll try and get the Ankar played down a little bit sooner.
I would say that probably getting value and armor off of the Armor Smith is Surrender's top priority now, seeing as he's only down to 8 health, but he has, you know, a weapon up, the second brawl in hand, so I don't feel that he would be too worried about dealing with a board from Staz, because if the Shaman falls behind with an empty board by turn 6, it's definitely really hard for them to come back, especially in Staz's case without a spell to combo off with the Violet Teacher, without a spell played on the previous turn to discover something off of Marsh Spawn. It's looking pretty rough for Staz here.
I mean, this is the downside of Staz's game plan so far, is say, okay, I will hold back on these cards until I can get maximum value. Like, you know, Violet Teacher, obviously you want a spell. Marsh Spawn, obviously you want a spell. But sometimes you just don't have that. So maybe for Staz, it should have been a case of throwing caution to the wind a little bit earlier and saying, you know what, maybe you do have the Blade Storm, maybe you do have the Brawl, but I'm not beating you even if you do have that.
So Staz decides to bite the bullet and finally invest the Violet Teacher onto the board, and there is the risk burst. So now a whole bunch of armor can be gained. The Armor Smith can be copied with the Bloodspawn Mercenary. Oof. And with 2 damage dealt to the Totem and to Violet Teacher, Surrender will easily be able to clear away Violet Teacher.
Yeah, that is pretty much the dream draw there for Surrender. Being able to copy a second Armor Smith as well. Perfect mana utilization. Mwah! A beautiful Hearthstone turn indeed. And now this just feels like the beginning of the end for the Shaman.
Yes,
maybe
indeed. And to make matters worse, there is now quite a few bombs in Staz's deck, which is like the last of his problems, honestly.
He can clear the board.
Yes, and pretty much reset Surrender's health total to near max. But it's a start.
It's something, but I mean, if we're talking about value, Surrender is just so far in the lead. The Ankar on its own will draw him, the second risky skipper and the other pirate in his deck. It's just all coming together very, very quickly indeed. The Sky Raider.
Though, that there are some wildcard ways for Shaman to come back in terms of value. Well, one of them is Marsh Spawn. When I have played this card, not in Totem Shaman, but in just some weird quest Shaman I tried to make work, oftentimes you discover cards like Eye of the Storm, which are huge value. And that can bring you back on board sometimes. But of course, Marsh Spawn, as a prerequisite, you need to play a spell before that. So something like the Serpent Shrine Portal, the new card from Shaman 3 mana, deal 3 and summon a 3-cost minion, Overload 1. Very powerful spell. Something like that. And time is what Staz needs to get back into the game.
I don't know if time is what he's going to have, because even though Surrender is playing a pretty control-y defensive deck overall, it's still got a lot of bombs in there, and it is going to start killing Staz pretty quickly.
Well, Splitting Axe for 1 spell totem, is that going to be the play? Simply so he can remove the 4/3. Sorry, he'll also get the one off of the hero power.
Yeah, I guess it makes a board, if nothing else. These totems are not completely useless, obviously. You're running Totemic Surge, Totemic Might, as well as Totemic Reflection, of course, to give a buff and summon an extra copy of it. But I've got to be honest, I don't know if it's going to be enough, especially with Deathwing able to clean all of these totems up and push Surrender absolutely back into the driver's seat, no questions asked.
Before that draw, I was thinking, would Surrender feel scared enough to respect this with a brawl? But that just solves all of its problems. Perfect utilization. There's a bunch of 0 health, 0 attack minions, so the Deathwing is almost completely healthy as well. This looks like it's over in 2 turns for Staz, unfortunately.
Yeah, those are not regular dead totems. Those are extremely dead totems.
There's the Blade Storm that you mentioned a while ago. Staz did its best to play around, but unfortunately didn't quite get the spells in the
Yeah.
right order that he wanted them.
Okay, I'm seeing Risky Skipper, Armor Smith, Horde Pillager allows to clear the board with a swing of the weapon that you will gain as well. Oh, it's an upgraded Wrench Caliber anyway. Yeah, sure, go for that instead. Yeah, lethal next turn, no board for Staz, and it just feels like to be honest, I was expecting how this Shaman deck would fare. It's just had all its minions cleared up turn after turn by the slightly slower control deck, and there was absolutely nothing that Staz can do there.
And that does mark the second loss for the Shaman for Staz in Swiss so far, but I will say though that this is one of the matchups he didn't really want to see. He did say that he prefers to line the Shaman up against decks like Druid, Mage, possibly Warlock, so it still has some possibility to take a win off of Surrender's Druid, for example, but it depends. What do you think Surrender is going to queue up next?
I also like to match up into good matchups. Call me crazy, but that's tends to be how I prefer to play Hearthstone. But with that first game out of the way, we're going to go to another quick video before we come back with the rest of this first series of 2020 Grandmasters. Wasn't that a thrilling video there? Sorry about that, thought we'd be going to video, but just a quick break before we head into our next game of the series. Surrender up 1-0 over Staz. Once again, this is a double elimination bracket, so no matter which player loses, they will not be out of this weekend's broadcast. They will still be in with a chance to get through to the top 4 on Sunday, but you definitely want to be winning your games wherever you can. And despite Surrender's lead here, it maybe feels like things might be turning around in this second game for Staz.
That's right. He has decided to queue up the Shaman again, given that Surrender's 2 remaining decks, because we're pretty sure that Demon Hunters have been banned all around. It seems like the Shaman would have a decent matchup against both the Mage and the Druid from Surrender, and Surrender did choose to queue up the Mage first. So why does the Shaman have a good matchup against the Mage? I would say probably because it has time to develop the totems and have them stick, which is very important to get the value out of those so that they can then be copied.
Well, first of all, Gia, I just want to say I really appreciate you asking yourself the questions yourself. Saves me a whole lot of trouble from being the host. That makes my life a lot easier.
It's so weird not having someone physically next to me to talk to. But that's all right.
We're together in spirit.
Do these things for social distancing.
But yes, I agree. The Mage, it's obviously lost a couple of the powerhouse cards from its lineup. Most significantly, Luna's Pocket Galaxy. You know, that was kind of the ultimate late game win every situation card. If you had time to get it down, shouldn't affect this matchup too much. But I feel like the main thing that may be holding the Mage back is the fact they don't have too many cheap removals. They rely mainly on the great big sweeping AoE cards like Fireball and Blizzard, which should hopefully, for Staz's sake, give the Shaman plenty of time to get a nice aggressive hold onto the board in the first few turns.
Yeah, you're right. Outside of Arcane Breath, which is of course a 1-of in the deck, it seems like there's hardly any single target removal in the first few turns for the Mage, which it then tries to shore up with some of the more anti-aggro cards new in the expansion, like Overconfident Orc.
And to be fair, I think that Surrender and the Orc have every reason to feel confident, though, because this is a tremendously powerful anti-aggro hand.
Yes.
Even the Ray of Frost is fine, but I would say all the others are premium cards to find in this matchup.
Yeah, the Doomsayer combined with a freeze effect, whether it's going to be Ray of Frost or something Surrender draws later on, could just be an emergency button to hit to deal with pretty much any board from Staz, given that the majority of the damage in the deck comes from minions.
Staz does not feel it's worth going for the Totemic Surge to set up Marsh Spawn quite yet. I think I can agree with that, because even though it is obviously a very powerful effect to play a 3/4 on curve and discover a spell, Totemic Surge can be one of the most powerful cards in your deck, especially when you've already got a second totem and a Splitting Axe in hand. Just hold on to them for the moment.
It does look like he's got a totem curve going on pretty smoothly this game compared to last game, so I do think he'll hold on to the Totemic Surge for a little bit of refill with the Marsh Spawn. So the question for Surrender is whether he wants to pull the trigger on Doomsayer right now, and he does, and even commits a freeze here to respect Flame Tongue and some other spell shenanigans.
Yeah, that's pretty surprising. It had to be a very specific combo of cards, right, in order to...
Which Staz has. Flame Tongue plus
out.
Totemic Surge.
Fair enough. It would not have worked if you hadn't gone for it. I mean, I was going to say, if I was in Surrender's situation, I am 99% sure I would just play Doomsayer, and I would probably lose the game because of it.
Very impressive from Surrender, and I would say maybe this is something that he picked up and decided to practice a little bit more after taking an 0-3 to Staz in the earlier rounds of Swifts. And now Staz in a very awkward position where I'm pretty sure he's just going to Hero Power and pass. Always feels awful, especially since he wanted to roll into a Axe turn.
Yeah. Would you ever consider playing the Totemic Surge now? Because it means that next turn, you know, Splitting Axe sounds awful on 4, Flame Tongue sounds pretty awful on an empty board. So maybe you could go Marsh Spawn plus Surging Tempest? Or is it still too valuable?
That is pretty much what Staz is considering here. I guess it would depend on the average quality of Discover spells. If Staz were reasonably confident to discover something that could develop his board, which I'm not sure there's that many things, then he would go for it. He is just going to go for it here. So it does indicate pretty clear to Surrender, I think, that Marshspawn will be coming down on the following turn.
Yep, I think pretty smart. Marshspawn, a card new to Ashes of Outland, requires a little bit of setup, like most of the old elemental cards. You have to play a spell on the previous turn, and if you did, you get to discover a spell. Also has a 3/4 stat line. So let's see what Staz can get here. It could absolutely dictate whether he has a chance in this game or not.
Well, these do not seem all that great, but the Frost Shock at the very end take 1 damage off of the Orc, thereby lowering its attack and also freeze it. Plague of Murloc seems... if he maybe draws into Violet Teacher at some point and manages to hold on for that long, maybe he can somehow transform into a Murloc Shaman deck, but I feel that if Staz is ever playing Plague of Murloc's tool with Surrender's board, that indicates he's already falling behind in the game.
I think he came to the same conclusion. There's also the idea that obviously the average Murloc is better than just a hero power totem, I would say. But it's quite difficult to actually churn out the totems very quickly. This is not like the Wicked Witch Doctor Shaman days of old.
Surrender with his choice of premium 4-drops to play. The Twilight Drake challenges the Marshspawn quite cleanly, but of course, Escape Mana Saber. The earlier you get it on board and the harder it is for your opponent to clear, the more dividends it pays.
I think I prefer the Twilight Drake here. The fact that it has 1 more health and also deals so cleanly with the Marshspawn feels pretty strong. And, you know, also you're ramping up to, 6 next turn instead of 5? That doesn't feel like an especially significant breakpoint yet.
Doesn't when you don't have Reno in hand. There's also the argument that maybe he draws into something with Arcane Intellect, but it's not a guarantee. So I'm just going for the clean trade on board.
All right, now Flame Tongue Totem obviously does get some value here in just taking out the overconfident Orc nice and easy.
However,
and I suppose the rest of the turn, Hero Power Totemic Might, that feels like it's dealt with pretty easily.
Yeah, the Taunt Totem I was going to say is probably the best outcome here for Staz in terms of hero powers, because it can maybe protect the Flame Tongue Totem and the Marshspawn from the Twilight Drake just running over them.
Oh man, this would be so much easier if Flame Tongue still cost 2. You could just go like, I guess, Mana Tide this turn and then Splitting Axe plus Flame Tongue next turn.
So what Staz is thinking about now perhaps is what can Surrender do on 5 mana to clear his board, and there is the Rustied Raider. There is also Rolling Fireball. So
that's the big
both
one.
of those, very bad for Staz, but I do think that I agree with him just, you know, taking the risk here. He is falling behind, so he absolutely needs to just try and hope that Surrender doesn't have those removal options available. So Arcane Breath is the draw. You can pair this with Mana Saber, but it doesn't quite cleanly remove anything.
Yeah, I guess
unless he picks.
You could just start your turn with the Arcane Breath to see what you get.
However, there's also a world I see where he goes for Mana Saber and instead just freezes the 5/3. Deal with the Flame Tongue later on. This is the most power on board, and technically only leaves Staz with 0 power that is able to attack turn.
Sounds good to me. Even the Splitting Axe does not quite come strong enough or with enough attack to take out the Twilight Drake. So it is just, again, this very awkward situation for Staz that he's been put into. And this is something that I think Casey was tweeting out yesterday, a European Grandmaster, that, you know, the difference between a good player and a fantastic player is that they will consistently put you in awkward situations. Nothing quite works out for you in terms of the numbers. That's not an accident. That is the direct result of these players making everything as awkward as possible for their opponents, which, again, Surrender has just done time and time again in all his games.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. He's thinking about what Staz can do and the best way he can make it difficult for Staz to do it. So the Splitting Axe here only will copy the Flame Tongue unless Staz chooses to commit a hero power as well. I see that as the way to milk the most value out of his hand, but of course he can go for a more aggressive approach by playing down to 1-drops as well. It is scary though that he is going into, well, 6 mana base turn for Surrender, up to 7 mana with the the Saber attacking, so that could be Flame Strike, that could be Blizzard, that could be Reno. But Surrender's shaking his head. He did not want to see this because he doesn't have those removal options in hand just yet.
The way that the positioning works does mean that the Twilight Drake can be taken out, but bringing the Flame Tongue Totem down to 1 health is definitely not what you want to see, especially with a Zephrys off the top. At the very least, I can see that offering Shadow Flame that would just be able to completely eliminate the board.
Yeah, along with the Mana Saber trading.
And
is there a more ideal way to do this with the order, if you want to maybe fit in Arcane Breath?
Yeah, that's the thing, is that you want to go Mana Saber face and then Arcane Breath for 2/5. But let's just hope that Zephrys clocks onto that plan.
Oh, no Shadow Flame offered.
Does not. He's offering Mass Dispel, because I guess these are all minions that have more stats than their initial mana. Their initial stats cost dictates they should. They're all buffed minions.
And Zephrys
and therefore it thinks
again.
that Mass Dispel is the most important one, which I think we can quite clearly see is not the card he wanted.
Yeah, is there any world he takes the Seed Giant? I don't think so. So Staz, I don't know if Staz is happy or sad to see this, because it does remove the majority of damage on board. He can, however, copy more minions, and if he draws something like Vicina, could come back with a lot of damage.
It's tough. Maybe for Surrender, if he'd attacked into the 0/2 totem first and then gone for Arcane Breath on the 2/5 Flame Tongue totem, then maybe Zephrys would have clocked on and offered the Shadow Flame for 3 damage AoE.
It does feel like recently that you are playing a bit of a gamble whenever you play Zephrys sometimes. It is difficult to test these specific situations and figure out 100% what Zephrys is going to offer. So Surrender just a decent option, I would say. Not the best.
This plays into the power that Staz is bringing to the table. Like I said, he brings decks that put his opponents in situations they don't know, because he always brings these weird decks that no one else is playing, like Totem Shaman. And to be honest, Surrender, if you're practicing for Grandmasters, is the first thing on your head, okay, I need to practice how Zeph interacts with a board full of buffed totems from the least represented class in the game. No, of course not. You're going to be practicing against Demon Hunter and Warlock, the common classes that you know you're going to face. And it really does just show Staz's unique skill set in Grandmasters.
Very true. And with that, Discover is just going to take the Hex to deal with the Escape Mana Saver. Again, praying that Surrender continues to not have any natural AoE in hand. He still has not drawn the Flame Strike or Blizzard or even Rolling Fireball. So there is an option to go something like Rusty Raider and either Ping or Arcane Missiles. There's actually a fair few good targets for Arcane Missiles here. He could go with the greedy option, try and draw with the Arcane Intellect and just put a taunt in the way. But again, it's scary when Vicina, etc. comes out.
Yeah, I like starting off with the Arcane Missiles here. It's likely to be at least pretty good here. It's going to squishy up some of the minions for the Rusty Raider, or more likely, the Bone Wraith coming up on this turn.
Now Staz here. This is actually an opportunity to maybe set up a Mana Tide Totem with Divine Shield, which is way more annoying to deal with than your regular old Mana Tide Totem. There's also the option to maybe protect 1 extra health on the Marsh card, but I don't necessarily think that's the way Staz is going to go about it.
I wonder, because I'm trying to think what actually could kill off the Mana Tide Totem as a 0/3. I guess it is the Rusty Raider that you're really afraid of, but then he's got a ping anyway, so the Mana Tide Totem, I feel like, giving it the Divine Shield or not, it's still probably just going to die.
That's fair, but you would also have to assume your opponent commits 2 extra mana to deal with that. Maybe that prevents them from doing something else. I'm just not sure how much I like this better than, say, just having 1 less health on the Marsh spawn. It would also prevent something like Ping and Flame Strike, although it does still die to Ping and Blizzard. It's tough call. But I do think that removing the Mana Tide will be Surrender's top priority after drawing. Staz is just running out. And I keep seeing this from Surrender. He seems to shake his head a lot even when he's in a pretty good spot. I'm sure there's something he's worried about that we just don't see because we are not at his level.
I mean, I guess just the Mana Tide totem in its own right is a little bit scary, but I mean, as we can see, he has the way to kill it off, right?
Mm-hmm. The debate is simply whether he wants to or draw first. And I quite like the draw. 24 still seems a decent health total. The deck from Staz does not include Bloodlust. It only has Vicina in terms of buffing the entire board and Storm's Wrath.
Yes, and for the totems, Totemic Surge as well. But that's looking a little bit flimsy at the moment, to say the least.
So Rolling Fireball can deal with the 4 minions on the left.
Instead, it just goes with the Rusted Raider. I think that's fine. It's definitely a pretty big threat against everything else. That's not a bad draw at all, though, being able to go for double buff on the totem. Will give you, what, 2 4/6s and a 2/4?
Yes, I believe so.
Which is pretty good.
Yeah, the
That's
question
a
here
fairly
is,
scary board.
Is there a way to position around Rolling Fireball more effectively? Well, Staz cannot control where the poppies spawn.
Yeah. I guess actually... Oh, it's interesting, right? Because if you go hero power and then buff, you might get something with a bigger benefit, like double healing totem. But
True.
obviously you can't attack with it right away, which is probably more valuable, agree. Even though it is just silence.
And he
Rusty
has
Raider
managed
taken
to,
care of.
yeah, he's managed to stick another board, which is pretty Rolling Fireball proof, at least for the middle minions.
Does that mean, Gia, that we just see the stall with Frostnova into everyone's favorite play, the box?
Quite possibly, yeah.
Ooh.
It depends on how how comfortable Surrender feels with his life total, because there's also a world where he can try and go for Caligos Power of Creation or Caligos whatever spell comes off the top. Staz,
Holding back on the Frostnova, probably wise.
Staz has just run out of gas 2 games in a row, probably not landing the ideal splitting axis for him, but bear in mind, this is already with kind of a substandard Zephyrus, however you want to define a standard Zephyrus to be. But also, to be fair, Surrender did have some premium anti-aggro options, and I would really draw it back to that very early play of coining out the Ray of Frost alongside Doomsayer.
Very true, very true. If he hadn't done that, it would have been, what, Totemic Surge plus the Flame Tongue Totem to clear it off, and from there, I think Surrender would have just taken way too much damage in the early game. We saw against the Warrior, even though the Surrender did up taking the match, he was down to like 8 health at the start of the game. This deck has a lot of aggressive potential.
Yeah, that would have rolled into a copy with a Splitting Axe. And as for these spells off of Caligos, pretty low value, but if you're Surrender, seeing that Staz is basically just drawing 1 card a turn, maybe he just wants to make sure that his health is high enough. In terms of value, I think he's got it in hand. He's got the box, he's got the Power of Creation, so I'm kind of partial to seeing Ice Barrier here as the pick.
Yep, I think I am as well. Just feels like health is his most pressing concern at the moment. And then I think probably, okay, I was going to say Power of Creation because you got a pretty decent chance to find a taunt and you're probably not dead either way. But Surrender is a little bit too scared.
It would have to be a very specific combination of cards. Well, Vicina would not have been active here unless Staz had gotten specifically an Ethereal Lackey and discovered an Overload spell. So maybe Surrender is thinking that is just the only way he loses from here, because now he's stuck a Caligos onto the board. 2 of these very powerful spells. And John Areno.
Right, what does that mean we're looking at now? trade the Kalagos. It's obviously not enough to take out the entire board yet,
Right.
just the Reno. Does he need to even bother with the puzzle box? Like, it feels like he's putting his hands in the gods when he doesn't need to, but he's going for it nonetheless.
Well, it's the odds between Power of Creation getting you a taunt or rush versus
Yeah.
box softening up the board. I have no idea what the odds on that are, but I can tell you this is turning out to be a pretty good box for Surrender.
Yeah, this is pretty good.
Drawing 4
That's
cards
less good.
to begin with, sure. If that hit the 7 cost at the 7 health totem, that would have been absolutely insane. This
Well,
is still,
it's not a board clear here.
but it's still gonna clear up a decent few things, I think. And with all the value in Surrender's hand, double ice barrier and secrets and the minions on board, Staz
Yep.
looks completely locked out of this one.
It definitely feels that way. Surrender taking, I don't know if I'd argue that as a safe or an unsafe line there with the box. I think the way I was looking at was not to go for the Frost Nova on the previous turn and instead just go with the Power of Creation and try and wrestle things back. But either way, in this instance, the box has delivered in enough for him here to take
More
the
so
game,
than the
looks like.
boxes you that have been delivered to you.
Too real, Gia. Too real.
Well, Staz doing what he can to piece together some damage. There's maybe a world he's hoping that, I don't know, he can go face with this, that neither of the secrets protect Surrender's health total, and maybe top deck Serpent Shrine into something. I don't know.
Serpent
not seeing
Shrine,
it.
Wolf Rider. Yeah, I don't know.
Wonder.
Whoops.
Well, that at least cancels out what the misdirection does.
Yeah.
And
There
Staz
we
gonna
go.
give it up there. So the Shaman falls 2 games in a row. Quite a letdown from how much I was hyping it up, but that is kind of a curse I tend to put on things sometimes. However, still have one last chance if Staz decides to play it once more up against Surrender's last deck, the Druid.
That's right, the Druid that is already infamous, relying very heavily on Kael'thas as well as Glowfly Swarm to try and dominate the board as much as possible. The Shaman has limited answers to a big board like that. Obviously, we saw the ability for 2 damage AoE with the double Sandstorm Elemental, but that feels like a pretty niche scenario that will occur. It feels more likely to me that Staz is going to be trying to go on the aggressive at the start, dominate the board in those first couple of turns, because Druid, in quite traditional fashion, is very weak in those first few turns. It's only when they start getting the mana ramp going or they can get Kael'thas down that they really start dominating the board. So I feel like if Staz is going to turn it around, this is his game to give it a try.
That's right. And I would also stress probably the importance of a well-timed Totemic Might in this matchup, because Druids... we've just gotten word that Staz is stepping off the Shaman for a while and is going for the Druid Mirror now. So if anybody likes Glowflies, you're about to see a lot of them.
That's right. This matchup can be... I don't know exactly what the word for it. Explosive would be one way of putting it, because if you're not running Starfalls in your list, which I'm just taking a look now, neither of these players are. It can definitely come down to earliest Glowfly puts you at a very, very big advantage.
It does.
But I know that no matter what happens, some disgustingly powerful plays will be made.
For sure. It is very reminiscent of Token Druids of old. We've seen the rotation of Whispering Woods into Wild. We've seen Spreading Clay rotate into Wild. But one thing about the matchup rings true. Whoever builds the board first can then buff the board first and then take all the value trades, wins them the game. So let us see exactly how that's going to pan out this time.
So taking a look right off the bat, none of these cards absolutely is what Staz is looking for. You're really looking for
Overgrowth.
Glowfly, I would say, Kael'thas, exactly the ramp as well at the start of this game.
And
Fungal Fortunes as well.
A great one to start with.
Yeah.
And Surrender with the nod. He has the Kael'thas. He has
He's
the
finally
Fungal
happy.
Fortunes.
All it took was drawing Kael'thas.
I do believe that makes a lot of people happy, and the same amount of people sad.
Yes.
So, fortunes for Staz, drawing him the over, and thankfully for Staz, not overdrawing Kael'thas, because that is the biggest disaster that can happen with this deck.
I mean, all Surrender's really looking for now is an Innovate, because if he finds that, I'm pretty sure we'll see Coin, Vate, Glowfly on 3. Because without Starfalls in the list again, there's very, very limited comeback potential from that. He doesn't have that, of course, so we're going to have to see something else. Maybe just something like going for healing his own face just to get a card out of hand so he can play the second Fungal Fortune. We'll have to see. But Staz is in the same situation on his side of the board. He wants to dump out his hand so he can start drawing more as well.
Yeah, it's also honestly a question of whether he even wants to maybe develop a Power of the Wild. I do believe it's a 2-of in the list, but it's just going to go for the hero power here. Like at balance, you have to try because you want to have enough spells in hand to fill the board with Glowfly, get the full 7 minions, but you also want to make room for when you start playing Overflows, your Fungal Fortunes, etc. The good thing that Staz has going for him, though, is that he's got the Overgrowth on 4.
He does. That's definitely something, but I don't know. Sorry, I feel like at the moment, Surrender, in terms of the ability to cheat mana, he definitely feels like he's in a slightly better position. Probably just Crystal Power face on this turn, I think. Obviously to heal his own, because he's at 10 cards, right? And he probably would rather have a random card in his deck than a Crystal Power.
Yeah, I can see
Having said that, though,
well,
he's still got Kael'thas, though, and
exactly.
the Glowflies, which are the big ones.
For sure. Crystal Power has so many purposes in the deck. It's removal against aggro, it's healing when you need it, and probably most importantly, it's a cheap spell for your Kael'thas turn. So it's a question really whether he wants to dump it, but Surrender is just going to go for that.
Yeah, I think I like it.
Yeah, that he's just going to go for the plan A of Coin, Glowfly, and the Glowfly if the first one gets cleared somehow.
Yeah, that definitely I think that's what he's going to go for where possible. Also, I think using the Crystal Power there makes sense as well because, you know, I would be happy with any of the cards that become 0 once you hit 7 mana, like Iron Bark or Bog Beam or Innovate as well.
True.
Would be perfectly fine.
And there comes the card that Staz absolutely did not want to see. It's not the full 7 minions, but oh my gosh, that is a draw, Derek.
Hello?
That is the draw.
Ooh, right, so how many can he play on this turn? He's one cheap spell off, right, from being able to go
Glowfly and
Kael'thas, Forest's Aid plus Gift of the Wild. And to be honest, I think if Staz is going to win this game, he has to do the full play.
So you're saying he should hold back a bit for now?
I think it might just be Glowfly this turn. Like, you could go Glowfly Power of the Wild, because that then obviously trades, at least at first glance, favorably against the 2/2s.
And on the following turn, he can Kael'thas with 2/0 mana spells, go for Forest Aid, and then Moonfire plus Fungal Fortunes, then buff that with Gift of the Wild. But that is hoping that he is not dead in the next turns, as Surrender does have Savage Roar in hand.
Which means he has 24 damage, right? But Staz is throwing down the Bog Beam just to try and survive. So now he's saying, I believe that I can draw a 0 mana spell off of the Fungal Fortunes.
Well, not necessarily. There's also a world where he just deals with this board.
Okay, fair enough, fair enough.
Yeah. He goes with this board, probably skips out on Forest Aid next turn, and there is a fair chance that quite a few things will stick because of the Power of the Wild buff. And then just Gift of the Wild whatever's left.
So it's less reliant on the all-in Kael'thas plan, and it also means he's not dead to
Savage Roar plus Power of the Wild.
Savage Roar Power of the Wild, exactly, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So Savage Roar now could be used to deliver, what, 22, 23 damage?
My gosh.
Which I think is a losing play. Because there's not enough burst in the deck to be going for stuff like that. You need to stick those boards.
I was going to say that, well, at first when you said Savage Roar, I thought you were going to suggest it to trade, but that happens to also, I think, be a losing play because even if Staz didn't have Kael'thas, for example, he would have 8 mana on the following turn, which is going into Forfeit, possibly a second Glowfly. So Surrender, it seems like, is stripping it into the minions and hoping that neither of those options is available to Staz. This feels awful for Surrender when he'll get the news.
It really does, but for Staz on the other side, he needs to be careful about not taking this too slow, because obviously he has his own Kael'thas, which is starting to come into play anytime soon. But Surrender has his own, which, having said that, is why I like from Staz seeing this Kael'thas come down now, not waiting too long with it at all.
That's right. There's the 0 mana spell. Not that he needed to necessarily buff the Forest Aid this turn. I mean, of course, it's better, but he doesn't even have to worry about Starfall is the thing. So I think even without the Staz would have been in a close to 100% position, given that Surrender doesn't have any more 0-cost spells of his own in hand.
Yes, for Surrender, I think we're looking at his chance of winning the game coming down to, first of all, surviving the next turn, which maybe is possible if he can hit, I don't know, some kind of a removal to take something off the board, but I'm not entirely sure what that would be. That's step one. Don't know how that is accomplished. And then you draw a bunch of 0 mana spells for Kael'thas on turn 7.
I don't see what singular draw can get Surrender out of this one.
Me neither, but that's part one of the plan. Didn't say it was a good plan, but it's all he's got.
It's a plan, though.
It's a plan.
And it looks like Surrender will be dropping his first game of the series in the explosive fashion that we did expect the mirror to go in. Which means Staz now has the option of queuing either the Shaman again, which has been kind of lackluster so far, or his own Mage into this Druid.
Yeah, I feel like the Mage probably is going to suffer against the Druid. It's one of those matchups where Mage against Quest Druid in the previous meta was very powerful because they had Luna's Pocket Galaxy, and the Quest Druid was a little bit more of a slow burner. It wasn't going for these super powerful explosive early turns. But now the dynamic, I think, has shifted quite drastically because there's no more Pocket Galaxy. The Mage is very much on the reactive side of the game plan, and I'm not sure if they have quite the necessary answers to be clearing off these many massive boards.
Yeah, you bring up a good point, because generally the Mage game plan back in the day was freezing stuff and delaying while they play their own big stuff, and that gives them the license to sort of ignore the board from the Druid and just race them that way. Nowadays, they have very little actual threats compared to before, and they have to rely more on the AoE. But one thing that Staz does have going for him is that his mage list is running Flame Ward, whereas Surrender's was not. And along with that package, there's also Ancient Mysteries. So that could be some mind games possible. Of course, Surrender doesn't necessarily need to attack his minions into the Flame Ward. He could just wait to buff them until they're higher than 3 health. But I feel that there will be a fair amount of mind games going on in this one.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think, again, as unlikely as it is, the best game plan for Mage is to try and just go with their own big minions as much as possible. It's definitely going to be more, I think, about what the Druid draws and hoping that the Druid doesn't hit those nutty starts that we saw from both Staz and Surrender in that first game there on either side of the board. And then, getting down an escaped Mana Saber and then maybe trying to cheat out a Tortollan Pilgrim into a Power of Creation as well. Maybe something like that can be a little bit too powerful if Kael'thas is at the bottom of the Druid's deck. But as you were saying, without consistent strong removal, it might be too much for Staz to deal with.
Right. So in terms of other removal options, there's quite a bit from the Mage. I'm trying to line them up 1-to-1. What does the Druid from Surrender has? 2 Glowflies farm. He's got the Soul of the Forest. That's probably 3 boards in and of itself. There is Forest Aid, which totals to 5 boards. And then there's Exotic Mount Seller, which could be a board and a half on its own. So it's up to the Mage to see whether they actually have what it takes to deal with those onslaughts. But there is a fair amount of removal.
I think the really scary one for Mage, same as Warlock, is Soul of the Forest. The only real answer they have to that in the entire deck is Reno. So maybe if Staz can find a way to save the Amazing Reno, sorry, I should say the Amazing Reno, the hero card, not Reno the Relicologist. Obviously, doesn't even matter about Death Rattles, just poof, all minions disappear no matter what.
Except Dormant,
so I think,
we think.
apart from Dormant, yeah. So if he can line that up into the Soul of the Forest, then maybe Staz can get away with this game. But it feels like Surrender's going to do everything he can to, again, make that as awkward as possible for Staz.
True. He's already got one of the steps of the game plan, Overgrowth, definitely something you want in the early game. Staz, however, having Zephyrus is always good because that's additional AoE. I do think the Arcane Intellect is probably something decent to keep because Druid probably won't be building their boards later than that. But the keep of the Reno is what's most interesting to me. I mean, you did make a very good point about Amazing Reno being the only way to deal with the Soul of the Forest board, but will he make it to turn 10 safely?
There's a lot of interesting decision points here because, you know, now that he's kept that Reno, the one thing you want off of Zephyrus most of all would be Wild Growth. If you play it on 2, you're going to get Wild Growth to ramp up quicker to that 10 mana slot. But that obviously means that you have one less AoE spell. My instinct is to say that, you know, like I was saying earlier, the strength that Mage should be relying on is trying to focus on its own game plan more than just purely removing, which Wild Growth would support. You know, you play that, ramp up, and try and get down to a Dragon Queen Alexstrasza as quick as you possibly can.
Well, if we do see that play from Staz, then I think it would indicate a lot of experience in the particular matchup.
Yeah.
And also, it's worth noting that the Zephyrus will go unchallenged on the board for now.
Always gives me a heart attack when a Power Word Shield comes up now that it's 0 mana, because I always think it's going to overwrite the one you want.
Right, but thankfully it's kicked Brightwing out of the lineup and not the good ones.
And nobody wants Brightwing. Sorry, friend.
Brightwing. Well, there's a removal for Zephyrus if Surrender wants to use it.
How many cards? Yeah, 9.
Given that he will Overgrowth this turn, on the following turn,
yeah.
I'm not sure if hand dumping is a huge concern, but if he is expecting the game plan you were talking about, and Mage eventually trying to race, maybe that chip damage,
right?
It's not really just chip, it's 3 damage a turn.
Yeah,
would be a
this is fine. Because mana looks like it's pretty much spoken for the next couple of turns, because I'm seeing as a curve, Overgrowth on 4, Mount Seller plus double 0 mana spell in the Bog Beam and the Ironbark on 7. Looks like a pretty strong curve to me.
You're seeing a curve. I'm seeing illegalness.
Well, I mean, they're both cheating mana. Look at this. It went from Wild Growth and Mana Saber on one side and Overgrowth on the other. It's disgusting.
So here's something interesting for Staz. You could actually preempt the Doomsayer here. Maybe it's too valuable.
Wow.
But this is going into either a Mount Seller or Innervate Forest aid turn, and then you could play an unchallenged Mana Saber with Solarian.
Yeah, I really like this because even the alternate turn 7 play, as we just saw there in Overgrowth, isn't really an option here for Surrender. He has too many cards in hand, so he doesn't really have any alternate ways to spend his mana on this turn, other than just, I suppose, dumping cards from his hand. But that doesn't feel great either.
It really doesn't. I guess there was a very unlikely world where Surrender could have cleared it with double Bog Beams and Hero Power, but then that would deprive him of the mana to do anything good. So he does look very resigned to just passing the turn here. So Fungal Fortunes would overdraw him 1, or maybe discard him stuff. He has both Mount Sellers in hand, so the only minion left is Kael'thas, but that is a big one that you don't want to discard.
And now we're kind of in the awkward situation for Staz on the other side, though, because even though things have gone very nicely for him in these early turns, he hit the Zephyrus, draw, ramp, you know, whatever you could want. The thing that's a bit awkward for him now is that kept Reno in his hand, because now any development that he makes onto the board kind of feels a little bit counterintuitive, because he knows, well, at least his original game plan probably was to play Reno as soon as possible and start getting those spells rolling off the hero power. Do you still agree with the keep of Amazing Reno, or do you think he should have been going for a more minion-focused game plan?
It's tough to say, because a lot of these draws did come after the mulligan, like seeing the Mana Saber and Solarian, and that play to preempt with Doomsayer, but I'm also quite concerned with the timing of everything because now he's playing Mana Saber and Solarian, possibly on the turn. So next turn he goes up to 8 mana and is still one short of being able to coin Reno into the turn 8 development of Surrender. So it's kind of like there's one more turn that Staz needs spoken for before he can go for a big Reno.
I mean, he could just play the escaped Mana Saber on this turn. He doesn't have to attack with it, and Druid has no way of answering it if it doesn't become unstealthed, which is why, yeah, I think, you know what? Spend your mana on minions. It's a nice proactive game plan. You don't have to play Reno. Just because you kept it on the mulligan doesn't mean you should sink everything into getting it down as soon as possible.
It is true. Kind of tunneling on the fact that I really expect Surrender to have some big development this turn, and Staz doesn't have, much removal. He has Freeze though, and Freeze is very important because if he manages enough health to survive into the next turn, he can then coin the Reno.
Pretty disastrous result there actually for Staz in the minion coming off the Bad Luck Albatross. One of the cards I think that Ixar tweeted out they've got their eye on at the moment for maybe being a little bit too powerful. Just absolutely wreaks havoc with the Mage's game plan. But on the other side, while I was saying that the Mage is being messed with the Albatrosses, Surrender just discarded Kael'thas off of the Fungal Fortunes. Now he's just relying on these Mount Sellers to get almost all the work done.
And truth be told, they are doing pretty well for this particular board. Yeah. And it seems that Staz will be able to freeze and survive for this turn. Freeze an unspecified amount of minions because he obviously does not want to coin Deep Freeze. He probably is going to Ray of Frost. The Arcane Mysteries has a chance of drawing either Flame Ward or Ice Barrier. Flame Ward obviously being the premier choice here.
Did just draw a Dragon though, so Dragon Caster plus Deep Freeze.
Yes, that seems quite good as well.
Into coin plus a coin Mana Saber attack Reno on the following turn. It's,
that does go into the thing you were mentioning a while ago, kind of wasting your own board development.
It's really not perfect, which I guess we were saying it's a bad matchup. It's unlikely to be a very nice, clean situation you're put in turn after turn.
I think I like being a bit more greedy with the Dragon Caster and saving the combo with Deep Freeze for when you can try and swing the board instead of just delaying it.
I'm on board with that.
Right. And another Ray of Frost is amazing here for Staz. Because, looks like he is going for the Deep Freeze now. So now this indicates to me that we might not be seeing Reno next turn.
We'll have to see. I'm not really sure how that Mount Seller is being dealt with very effectively.
Okay, Mana Saber used now. So he's going for the board swing on this turn instead.
Okay, just trying to swing things back in his favor. We'll have to see how it works out, because to be honest, I'm not sure if it's going to work that well. He can double trade into the Dragon Caster and then just cast a whole bunch more spells to make more beasts.
Exactly. The Mana Saber will also 100% be removed this turn to remove the possibility of coin Reno. So Staz's next turn is looking like just a bunch of Ray of Frost, which is the second one still Twin Spell? I didn't get a chance to see.
I think it's one Twin Spell, one Reg.
Okay, so that maybe lets him survive one more turn, but not super sure about this turn because if you're not clearing the Mount Seller, it's pretty much like you never cleared anything at all because it's free refill.
I agree. Obviously, Surrender knows that he's not facing down Reno on this turn, but he does still need to bear in mind a card was kept in the mulligan, it hasn't been played, and there's still the coin. So he knows that the turn after this one from Staz, he could very well be facing that down. But he doesn't have that much buff in his hand. It's just the power of the wild he has at the moment, and I guess he's maybe just hoping that that'll be enough to get him to lethal.
Oh, a Zixar, 2 rush minions. Okay.
Wow, that's pretty good.
Zixar is a board refill on its own.
And again, it's that good news, bad news situation for Staz. He can survive pretty easily on this turn with all the Ray of Frosts he has, but then he goes Reno next turn, and then what? All he has is an Alexstrasza.
It's gotta be just relying on the spells, The good thing, though, is that it seems like he might be able to freeze the Albatross again, and therefore poof it instead of killing it.
Good point.
Which means that in theory, all of his Highlander effects will still be available. The big ones being, of course, Reno the Minion and Alexstrasza the Dragon Queen. Yeah, I like this. We'll just commit all of... Ooh. So, I'm not sure about first
You think he should attack with the Elemental?
Right, because you're gonna Reno anyway next turn, and there's pretty much nothing your opponent can do about it. Like, if you're going to commit the Ray of Frost, I figure it would be on one of those other mini of 3 health. And even then, I don't think it's that great.
I think that was just a pretty much straight up didn't really spot it. Overconfident Orc just to protect his health total. I don't know, like this isn't completely just throwing away the overconfident Orc here, because the difference between 29 health and 24 health, 23 health, something like that, can be significant. That's around the kind of breakpoint that Druid can deal if they don't have the full suite of buff damage cards. If they just have one Savage Roar or one Gift of the Wild but not the other, then maybe you can survive at 29 but not 23. But even then, this whole turn for Staz just felt like maybe it should have been thought through a little bit more securely at the start of the turn.
It seems a little bit tunneled on surviving just this turn, but maybe he's not accounting for the possible refill from Surrender. Because from Staz's perspective, he's seen 2 Mount Sellers, he's seen Kel'Thas be discarded. So another Zigzor, what is this? Okay, that's getting poofed anyway. But he hasn't seen Glowfly or Forest Aid, so I am really not sure about committing that level of resources when he's going to certainly Reno anyway.
Yeah, I think I agree. Maybe he got a little bit like an Orc, overconfident, when he saw the Kael'thas discarded, and he thought, okay, with that gone, there's pretty much nothing that can be done, or there's much more limited ability to explode onto the board. But the thing is, even if he does have Blizzard, Flame Strike, Rolling Fireball in his deck, he doesn't have them in his hand. It doesn't matter if they're in the deck because he doesn't have them yet.
True. He at least has Nova and Barrier for some stall, but the problem with these is that Barrier doesn't necessarily work as a stall when your opponent has all the damage in one turn anyway. This is a card that delays, well, depending on damage breakpoints. The Nova is an unconditional stall. It's good. But what can he develop behind it? Alexstrasza is not cheap enough to play alongside the Nova. So anyway.
And here it is. He kept it in the starting mulligan. He ramped into it as quick as he possibly could. And there it is, technically turn 8. And we're seeing the amazing Reno come down. And who knows? Reno can truly be amazing. Despite him being undeniably on the back foot now, a couple of lucky spells might be able to pull him back into the lead.
Yeah, a bunch of AoE or even just card draw for Staz at this point.
True.
Outside of those conditions, though, I'm not seeing if Reno can deal with something as wide as Glowfly Swarm or Gift of the Wild. And Surrender, Forest Aid, and Surrender has a bunch of refill.
Yeah, it doesn't have the soul of the forest yet, which is obviously what he's looking for in this situation, which I guess is actually why he's going with the expensive card draw here. Because, you play the Glowfly, you try and draw through your deck as quick as possible. Despite only having 4 left in his deck, he just wants to find the soul of the forest.
Exactly.
Whoa.
That does...
That's the disaster! He has no mana!
God. Wait,
that ate up all his mana. That is the single worst spell Staz could get.
I've never seen that happen. Oh my gosh. Is he dead next turn? Okay. So he goes up to 42 with the barrier. That's insane.
It's a mystery secret, though. Surrender does not know whether it's barrier or flame ward.
Exactly. He does, however, have Gift of the Wild, so he can play around, play more very cleanly, and also stack the Power of the Wild onto it.
And so what's that? 5 times 6, so that's just straight up 30 damage he could deal with Power of the Wild, Gift of the Wild. Which obviously is not lethal, even if, no matter which secret it is. But you probably just go for it, right?
Yeah, I do like it. Cash in the damage now. Staz still has to spend most of his mana AoEing next turn if he even wants to survive, and then he's just got another refill and another refill. One of those refills is going to have the stole behind it.
Yeah, but thankfully for Staz, he had the Forbidden Words last turn to take out one of these Glowflies. Whew, that was lucky for him, or he'd be dead.
Oh yeah, wow. Lifesaver, that forbidden words. Oh no!
Disaster! Reno, what are you doing, man?
Oh my goodness. This is the most amazing Reno ever for Surrender, I would say.
Reno the relicologist turning up just in time, and he's like, "Nah, sorry, I can't help you with that. That's the big guys department."
Well, it's gonna have to be Nova with something, and Reno's the only playable minion. Unless he wants to try like Flame Strike Nova to soften up the board for a possible Blizzard top deck or slash Reno in the next turn.
The Grave Rune obviously only summons 2/2s, not 5/5 taunts, so it's not necessarily looking at lethal. But sure, now he can go trade the Reno into the 5/2, then Flame Strike next turn to try and clear everything up.
Probably only has to invest some removal into the Reno and then a Soul of the Forest to lock out the game.
Yeah, I guess Soul of the Forest this turn. I was wondering if he should save it for like a second Glowfly board, but he can tell pretty clearly that this is going to be probably cleared up by a Flame Strike, or at least frozen for a turn by a Blizzard.
Right.
So he just needs to pray there's no AoE off of this Reno spell now.
So I guess he's just debating now whether he wants to clear Reno with 3 spells. I don't hate it.
I think you actually just chill. It makes your Glowfly really bad. Although I guess you have double
That's fair.
double Forest Aid, huh?
I am just thinking that the Reno makes for a clean clear on the first layer. Of course, you got a whole second layer.
True, yeah.
Ah, going for a heal.
See, okay, healing. Yeah,
Interesting.
Confused there for a second.
Misdirection. Surrender's thinking that's Explosive Trap and that Staz maybe has a way to deal with the first layer, and he does for most of them.
Gia, that Flame Ward is absolutely huge.
It is nuts.
You can trade Reno into the 5/5. Oh wait, there's 2 5/5s now because he healed. So Reno into the 5/5, Flame Strike, Flame Ward. There's then a 5/1 and a bunch of 2/2s.
Correct. And I am not exactly sure of the way this interacts with action, but
oh my god, you're right.
Potentially the 5/1 kills itself and then the Flame Ward goes off.
If I could just cast
no, it would be like the 5/1 would attack face, Misdirection would activate.
Oh
no, wait, but
okay.
Flame Ward activates after a minion attacks your
Exactly.
hero, right?
I'm not sure.
Oh
Does
my
it even
god,
go off?
I've never seen this interaction before.
Yeah. Because it doesn't get to attack face in most cases. So, but then
But you have
would
attacked the face though, right? So maybe it would resolve the Misdirection, then the Flame Ward would go off. Either way, it's his only play.
Whatever happened in this is an achievement for Hearthstone science. As far as at some point Surrender will have to attack.
I'm almost out of cards.
Yeah.
He can buff the health.
Oh yes, he can.
So you buff it up to a 5/1. So he knows that one of these is Flame Ward.
He's worried about Explosive also.
Okay, so he's ruled out Snake and Freezing. He's afraid of Explosive, obviously.
But it's kind of redundant, actually.
I think this is correct. Yeah.
It's redundant with Flame Ward. And since he knows it's Flame Ward, he bites the bullet anyway.
So Flame Ward didn't go off because they're still green, right?
It did not. So it means something has to hit the face first.
So he has lethal now, right?
Yes, he does, with the hero power. And, yeah, sorry. And just attacking with a low health minion first, that works. So, oh my goodness.
An incredibly close game there, and it came right down to the wire. But Surrender coming up the victor, 3-1 over Staz. And I've got to say, it felt somewhat deserved for me. I think that Staz, I really liked the creativity he showed with bringing the Totem Shaman, despite no one else going for that very Staz style of play. But I think in that mage game there, in the mid sections of the game, it really felt like he was just getting a little bit fuzzy in how he was planning out his games. He should have had a more concrete direction, I think, in knowing exactly when to swing the board, what to freeze, and then he might have had enough resources left behind to clear enough boards to win the game.
I will agree that he was flip-floppy in the middle. Definitely things could have turned out a lot differently if that Reno had just not been so terrible.
It
wasn't
was really
asking for
bad.
amazing, just not forbidden words, my goodness. And on top of that, yeah, that one particular turn we singled out where he committed Rays of Frost and an overconfident Orc when he probably didn't have to, and just taken a little bit extra damage. Maybe that could have panned out a bit differently, but in the end, what a fun series to kick off Grandmasters Season 1 of 2020.
It really, really was. And I think that means we can now take a look at the bracket to see how things are shaking out in Group A for this weekend. Again, we're going to be playing Group A today with half of our top 8. Get that in just a second. And the second Group B tomorrow before we cut to top 4 on Sunday to find out who will be getting the most points. Because again, this is the Swiss portion. The first 3 weeks of Grandmasters here for this season will be basically an individual tournament each week, in which the higher you finish in the tournament, the more points you get as we head into the round robin later on. And there you can see Surrender is our current first player going into the winners match, which will be happening a little bit later on today, and he will be facing either Kin or Chonsu, which we will be finding out next, I believe.
Yeah, and the good thing for these players is that even though some of them will not necessarily make it to the top of the bracket, they will walk away with no less than 3 points guaranteed.
Yeah, it's really not bad.
It's
They're already in the top
thinking
half.
that, yeah, you're doing better than half the players in your region.
And I think a lot of the Grandmasters are feeling that, how strong the rest of the field is. Gallon, one of the players who joined the Americas Grandmasters system last year, was tweeting out that, going just 3-4 or 4-3, I think it was, in his Swiss record is so much harder than just climbing up ladder. Like, the difference between the best players in the world and just a good ladder player, even a good legend ladder player, is just, it really is miles apart. These players are just playing so fantastically well and figuring out the best decks so quickly.
Yeah, I think the exact wording he used is that going rank 1 on NA might even be easier. Sorry, rank 1 legend on NA might even be easier than at least going 3-4 against these players. So that's right, guys. You heard it here. Finishing top on ladder is just nothing. It's just child's play to these Grandmasters.
It is NA, Gio. It doesn't really count,
Okay, I guess we're free to trash talk NA here because neither of us are from there.
Exactly. That's what APAC's all about. It's, best Asia Pacific Grandmasters players in the world second, trashing on NA first. But with that aside, before I get in trouble,